Pursuing multiple passions and interests can be great, fulfilling, engaging, but pursuing multiple passions and interests and struggling financially or failing to build wealth or grow in your career doesn't really hit the same. And that's what I want to talk about in this video, how I've managed to build and manage my six-figure tech career with my multiple passions and interests, with my painting, my content creation, my travel, and all the other stuff. How have I made it work? And I think these tips and this information will be useful wherever you are. So whether you haven't yet hit six figures and you're building up to it, or you have and you've surpassed that, but you're looking for more balance between the things in your life. So let's just get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is something that you may not actually want to hear as someone with multiple passions and interests, but it's that at the beginning of your career, especially if you are trying to transition from one career into another, into a high paying one, your focus is going to have to be on the skills associated with that career, especially if you want to move fast, you want to have velocity when you are, progressing through this. And that's because people don't typically just hand out six figures for nothing, right? There's a degree of mastery that it's required for you to get a six-figure job. And that is the case with me, and it's the case with people who work in tech and all these other high-paying industries. And if I just go back to my experience of transitioning into tech, this is exactly what the case was for me. I moved from doing geography at undergrad and, being in that field to moving into an engineering space. And in order for me to learn those skills, programming, cloud engineering, DevOps practices and tools, CI/CD pipelines, all this stuff, which if you don't work in tech, it probably just means nothing to you. But in order to learn those skills, I had to really double down and focus. I did a boot camp style learning, which meant from 9 to 5, I was in the boot camp classes, but then from 5 to 9 and beyond, and on the weekends, I was still building my applications, doing my coursework, learning skills, right? When it came time to get my certifications, my professional certificates, I had to double down and focus in on that. And now I know it's hard to hear that because you want to believe that you can do everything at once. But as I've spoken about before, this is where you have to focus in on the season and what it is you're trying to achieve at that moment. But the beautiful thing is, once you get past this initial I don't want to say hurdle, but this initial front loading of effort and energy, things start to tailor off a little bit, because getting those foundational skills, knowledge or frameworks, and the way basically that industry works is probably the most taxing point, because you're going from zero, you're trying to get from zero to the next step. But the next step onwards is a lot easier because you have all that knowledge, you have that exposure, and then you don't have to go so hard. And now I'm not suggesting that you don't keep trying to progress in your career and you don't keep trying to upskill and get certifications, but you don't have to work as hard in that sense of grit constantly like you do at the beginning. So if you just bear this in mind that, okay, right now I'm going to need to focus on this so that I can get to where I need to in the future. And the thing is, this is often the route for a lot of successful people, right? I've used Rihanna as an example of a Renaissance woman. She's doing a lot of things. She has Fenty Beauty, her fashion line, right? Her music, well, she doesn't really make music as much anymore, but she has a lot of things that are going on. She just launched a hairline. But let's not be mistaken. At the beginning, Rihanna was a musician for years. She built the beginning of her wealth and her exposure through being a musician and mastering that and garnering success around that. And then she was able to leverage it and the money that she got from that and the connection she made to branch into all these different interests that she had and build out these different business ventures that she was interested in exploring, right? And not everybody is like this, but the vast majority of people who we see being able to diversify and engage in all of these things now often started with a set of skills and a career that was quite focused. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about optimizing our time. Now, one of the key things that I spoke about was continuing to grow in your career and gain skills that allows you to make more and more money. But we also still want to have time for the things that we want to do outside of work, right? We still want to be able to pursue those passions and interests. So this is the key about using your time in the most effective way possible. And one of the ways to do this is your hours that you are working, the hours that you are paid for, is down to you to optimize those hours, right? You can just lay back and take things very slowly throughout, or you can use the pockets of time that you have to upskill. Training. Some companies that I've worked for have actually training time allowed and budgeted into the week. So you use those effectively to gain certifications and, revise for those tests. Or, and this is a really, really key one that I like, is I actually take on tasks that will force me to learn new skills that are going to be advantageous to me in my career and in building wealth. And so if you're able to do this, it means you have to spend less time outside of those hours, building up those skills. That's not to say you don't and you never ever, venture into those skills outside of work, but the necessity isn't there as much. So you're still doing your work, you're still finishing the tasks that are expected of you, but you're also building up new skills in the meantime, and then using the time outside of work to pursue the other things. The next 2 points I want to talk about may seem like they're in conflict with each other, but I think if we let it play out, it all makes sense. And the first one is actually about the domains that your passions fall into. you. I think that if you have passions that don't overexert the same muscle, it can actually be complementary. And what I mean by this is my day job, for example, is in tech. That is very taxing on the brain in terms of, logical processes and systems and working through challenging tasks in that sense. But then one of my other passions is powerlifting and exercise and Pilates, which is moving and using a different part of my body, my brain, and my muscles. And then I have painting and content creation, which is more, I'd say, an artistic venture. And in one sense, it can seem like you're trying to do a lot, right? And we'll speak about this in the next point, but I'm also not overexerting the same muscles, like, right, pumping and, asking a lot from the same parts of me, my brain and my body. If you do try to do that too much, you can burn out. Like, I think about the fact that if my day job was tech, and then I also was trying to pursue like chess and becoming a chess master, or I was also trying to write a research paper in depth about, something that was very complex. And I was also doing, so if they were on the same level in a sense that they all required a lot of logic and they required a lot of written communication and they required a lot of energy in that sense, the likelihood of me burning out, I feel, could be quite high, right? And don't get me wrong, this comes with its own set of challenges because you have to context switch, right? But when you take a step back and look at things, I think the complementary nature of the passions and interests that you have really should be taken into consideration, especially if you're looking for longevity and you're looking for things to supplement what you do in your day-to-day job and your career. Now, the next point I'm going to make is where it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but it's about the synergies that I've spoken about in other videos, because despite the fact that I may be working in different ways, we can still have common threads across things. So like, for example, I talk about tech on my tech channel, but I also talk about tech and, work in tech during my day job and my career. And so even though I'm working my brain and my body and my muscles in different ways, there's an overlap there, which means I don't have to stretch myself too thin. It's the reason why on this channel, I typically talk about things that I've experienced and learned myself, rather than trying to pluck things out of thin air, right? Like if I started to talk to you about, I don't know, how to be a gymnast, right? Like if that's the videos I was creating, this would be a lot of hard work. And I'm not saying it's not already, but me just talking about my life experiences, the things that I learned through research, through my readings, through my experiences, there's a lot more synergy in that. Right? So even though the things are different, the conversations have a common thread, or the tasks and the passions have a common thread. And it doesn't have to be the case with everything. Like I'm not painting computers, right? Or I'm not painting the cloud, for example, although I do have a few ideas for some paintings that I want to incorporate things that I have and learned about in tech, but that's a whole nother thing. But I think you get the point that I'm making. Synergy does not mean that the things have to be exactly the same, but that you can find common threads between them, which makes the whole process of balancing the two easier. The next thing I want to talk about is a far more practical step, and it's planning how you're going to take your time off strategically. A lot of the times we may plan to take time off, a week off, 2 weeks off, and then the time comes and then we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with the time and how we're going to make the most of it. And I'm not saying that you don't ever rest, that you take time off and everything has to be filled up with things. But if you're really trying to pursue multiple passions and interests, then having a week or two off to focus on something else can be really, really valuable time, right? Really, really valuable time for you to pursue and grow and develop these things more. So ahead of time, plan what you are going to do with that week or 2 weeks off or however long you take. For example, I don't take time off as often now that I'm a contractor, to be honest, but I took a whole week off to go to Florence to study oil painting, right? In one of the birthplaces of the Renaissance and Renaissance art. I used my time effectively, and that allowed me again to balance what I'm trying to do with my career, but also what I'm trying to do with my multiple passions and interests. So think about it in advance. How can you use the time that you have, that you plan on taking off, more strategically? The next thing I want to talk about is interest stacking. And if you've read the book Atomic Habits, then you're probably familiar with habit stacking. And I don't know, this just sounded cool, so I thought interest stacking. Anyway, the point here is that you layer your interests and passions in a way that you can get more out of a single activity or like a single period of time that you have. For example, I like going for walks, and it's really important for me to get my steps in, right? For fitness, but also for clearing my mind. I also like nature. So I would deliberately pick paths that put me through nature, right? That allow me to explore more of the natural world. But I also really, really like books and learning from books and podcasts. Not so much audiobooks at the moment, but podcasts, YouTube videos, and things of this nature. So I may also listen to one of those. And at this point, I'm like stacking like 3 or 4 interests at one time, right? And I'm able to engage and learn in different ways and make the most of the time. And so think about the way you can stack your interests in this way to get the most out of them effectively. The next tip is actually kind of similar, but it's about how you can integrate your interests with work itself. For example, if you like to travel and explore, Can you pursue a remote job? For example, I work remotely and my job allows me to work from anywhere in the world. And I've used that on multiple occasions. I have worked from Florence, I have worked from Costa Rica, I have worked from Portugal, right? There are a number of locations around the world that I have been able to work from. And so that allows me to explore the travel element without heavily impacting my work. Right, so think about the ways that you can integrate that. It's a similar thing where if public speaking is one of your interests, how can you draw that out more at work? And again, use that time to build that interest, that skill, that passion that you really want to pursue, right? Is it possible for you to take more lead roles in the sense of out-facing or outbound communication, right? Are there opportunities to speak at work? And, there's like weekly meetings or those monthly big kind of, like internal conferences that people have, right? Or town halls and things like that. Is there ways that you can build on your interests and skills during hours at work again? The next thing I want to talk about is actually picking your career strategically. And what I mean by this is there are multiple ways to make six figures, multiple careers and industries, but they're not all equal in terms of the amount of time they require from you. I could be making six figures in banking, but also be working 80 hours a week. Or I could be making six figures in tech, and most days at 5 o'clock or 5:30 be able to close my laptop and get on with the other things that I'm interested in. So think clearly about the type of life that you want to live and the amount of time that you want to do other things, and build that into your career planning process, right? Or your development within your career. The final thing I want to talk about is actually compromise and deep work. Now, a lot of the time we say we don't have the time to pursue our multiple passions and interests because, there's just not enough time once you get home from work, and once you do this and that, and you cook, and, the normal life stuff that we have to do to exist. However, most of us are also spending hours and hours scrolling social media. Right? And I've spoken about this. I don't think social media is all bad. I think it can be a great source of information and community building. However, if you are spending 4 hours a day on TikTok, is it that you don't have time to pursue that passion of painting, of crocheting, roller skating, coding? Or is it that you are choosing to spend that time, that valuable time and attention somewhere else? And a lot of the time, that is the case. Most of us are spending an incredible amount of time on low impact or low effectiveness tasks that aren't really enriching our lives, but are taking away a lot of time and attention. And so you really have to be honest with yourself. Do I want the things that I say I do enough to put the other things aside? To maybe delete TikTok for a while, or Instagram, or whatever it is that is consuming a lot of your time and not helping you move forward in either your career or your interests and passions. And the reason why I actually put this in with deep work is because when you free up these blocks of time that you were previously spending on other things to engage in your interests and your skills and your passions, you can then start to harness the benefits of deep work. And I first read about deep work when I was reading Cal Newport's book. And even though it's something that I'd been doing for years, I guess now we had a way of labeling it and understanding why it can be so effective. And this is where you spend hours, blocks of time just zoning in on that one thing, right? So whether it is painting for a couple of hours or coding for a couple of hours or making content and editing for hours, right? And all the things and the benefits that come with that process and that way of working, you're able to unlock that. Right? You're able to unlock that focus, that flow state where, ideas are just coming to you, all right? Or things just seem to fall more easily into place because for all this period, your brain is focused on one thing. It's locked into one thing, all right? So this balance of, letting go of some things and engaging deeper into others, you'll start to find that again, you actually do have a lot more time than you think. Anyway, that's it. That's what I wanted to speak about, how I manage my six-figure tech job with my multiple passions and interests, and how I think you can do the same. I don't think you have to give everything up. I just think you have to understand that seasons change, but also that there are very practical steps that you can take to make more time for these things in your life. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.